Nigeria's gross domestic product grew by 5.01% in the second quarter of 2021, the highest economic growth recorded under the Muhammadu Buhari administration in 6 years. The National Bureau of Statistics, in its Q2 GDP report, said the 5.01% growth rate recorded year-on-year was higher than the -6.1% growth recorded in Q2 2020 and the 0.51 recorded in Q1 2021. The NBS said the GDP figure was indicative of the return of business and economic activity levels seen prior to the nationwide implementation of COVID-19 related restrictions. For more on this, Arise business correspondent ROTUS ODIRI joins us now. Welcome back, ROTUS.
Good morning again to you three. So again, as you just said, 3 consecutive quarters of growth now under this administration, 0.11 in the fourth quarter of 2020, 0.5 in this first quarter of 2021, and now 5%. Now, why the big jump? It is very, very important to keep in mind that there's a base effect here. Nigeria suffered her worst contraction in last year at 6%. So in this same quarter, a year ago, we contracted by 6% as a result of the constriction of activities due to the lockdown put in place because of COVID-19. In quarter 3, we then contracted by 3%, right? It was less of a contraction that we saw last year, but that was not officially confirmed that we were in recession. And then we exited. So on a year-on-year basis, if you compare the constriction in activity last year in the second quarter of 2020 to a more robust people moving around, activities being returning. That's why you're seeing this jump. I had an economist on the Global Business Report who saw us growing by 8%. And even I was like, oh, wow, really? And they predicted it was because of the base effect. But that's the main reason for what we're seeing here. If you look at the breakdown of the sectors, this is still growth that is being pushed by the non-oil sector of the economy. Non-oil grew by about 6.74%. Meanwhile, the oil sector contracted by 12%. In fact, second quarter oil production was 1.6 million barrels per day in the second quarter of this year. It was 1.7 or so, 1.71 in the first quarter of this year. So the oil sector, you're still not seeing the growth that we've seen in Nigeria's economy right now is being pushed by the non-oil sector. As far as the subsectors for non-oil, trade, ICT, which is the champion here, manufacturing, crop production, I believe, from agriculture. I'm still looking through the figures. I think agriculture saw a slight decrease quarter on quarter from 2 to 1. But the main story here for our viewers, how did this happen? Base effect. Huge contraction this time quarter last year, and also driven by the non-oil sector. That's what's that's what led to this growth that we're seeing.
I mean, okay, Dr. Bati.
Okay, ROTUS, can you break this down for us in terms of the cost of food items in the market, in terms of the cost of services, and in terms of what is going to happen to our pockets that appear to be very empty? Because if you say, consistent growth, what does that translate into?
Your question is perfect, Doctor, because if you go on to the man on the street and say, hey, Nigeria's GDP grew by 5% in the second quarter of this year, he or she is going to look at you and okay, so, and they'll tap themselves. The same issues that we've talked about, food prices, inflation is at over 17% year on year in Nigeria. The metrics that are still hitting the pockets of Nigerians are still very prevalent. Again, you are looking at GDP growth that is being compared on a year-on-year basis. So folks have to put that in mind compared to the prior base. As far as what the average Nigerian is facing, the Bureau of Statistics just came out with cooking gas report for Q2, which shows that cooking gas on average has increased. Kerosene, look at a number of other factors. So what the average Nigerian is paying for day-to-day pocketbook issues, those prices are still very elevated. So, at a macro level, yes, the economy is growing, bouncing back from what the contraction we saw, but day-to-day, the average Nigerian is still facing high costs of goods and services.
But CPI is in tatters, obviously. Consumer Price Index not looking good for Nigeria. And in the inflation numbers, food inflation numbers still growing, even if there's a knock-on effect, on the people. But I'd like to ask you, what are the key sectors that push? You talked about non-oil.
Right.
Was it telecoms? Because I know it's the bulk of SMEs. was the entertainment sector growth, very palpable here too, because I know there were return to a lot of Owambe's and events,
right,
kicked off. I mean, what were those key sectors that pushed them up? And what should be the incentive of the government, to bolster those sectors? Because we've been seeing a lot of clapdown on tech and the likes. And this is a monumental one for the president, the highest growth ever.
Right.
Since he got into power. And can he keep this up?
Yeah, well, can he keep this up depends on oil prices, which is what in the last 2 times we've fallen into recession. It's been because oil prices have cratered, and we still depend so much. And then if you look at all the news around oil and gas, there's been a lot of news. We talked about the NNPC giving their oil price projections going forward. But again, oil contracted 12% year on year in the second quarter. So this growth was primarily non-oil growth. Again, non-oil sector of the economy grew by 6.7%. As far as the sectors, still going through the numbers, but trade, manufacturing, crop production under agriculture, and of course, for me, even when I talk stocks, I tell people to look at the publicly traded telco companies on the exchange. The subsector of telecommunications under ICT, those were the factors that pushed non-oil growth. As far as your question on incentives, yeah, the federal government has to focus on incentivizing the non-oil sector because that has been the primary driver of growth for Nigeria's economy. So that's what the focus has to be.
Well, I'm going to look for the silver lining, as always. This GDP growth of, you said 5%, it's 5.01%.
Right, let's get that 0.01% in there.
It actually outpaces population growth, which is good, right? Population growth is like 3%.
Yeah, correct, that's on an annual basis. But again, I do want to make sure everybody understands. Year on year, you are coming from a minus 6% at this very period last year. Everything's rebounded. So you have to now see, year on year, full year GDP growth for 2020 was negative 1.9%. So we have to keep that in mind. So we have to look at what this factors into for 2021. IMF, World Bank, they're seeing growth for us year on the full year. So it's good, but again, it's a rebound. It shows that the economy reopened. COVID caused this, right? So, we are seeing the effects of a rebound. That's how to contextualize this compared to the quarter last year.
Yeah, but beyond COVID, I mean, in every part of the world, the issue is about COVID, whether it's in Japan or even in China, anywhere at all. But I think the long-term expectation is that Nigeria should be able to do something to ensure that in the long run, full-year GDP will be able to get to a double-digit point. Do you see any hope in that regard? And do you think that we are moving in that direction, particularly now that we have moved from ERGP to medium-term framework plan and all of that? Because, look, we need to race against time, whether there's COVID or not. Where is the missing link in terms of economic management?
Remember when Rufai earlier this morning was saying that when we're talking about Nigeria versus South Africa in terms of the size of the respective economies, and Rufai said it's economic management that has been a big factor here. Management of the economy is what has to be the main focus in terms of the management of the economy. In fact, we have on the Global Business Report an economist from the Nigerian Economic Summit Group who has actually he's one of 3 authors that wrote a paper on comparing Nigeria to Indonesia. Indonesia has about 250 million people. Indonesia has a $1 trillion economy, similar metrics to Nigeria. And if you think of where Nigeria was in the 60s to where Indonesia was in the 60s, Malaysia coming here to get palm oil kernels, and where Malaysia is now, Nigeria should be a much larger economy than it is. So to answer your question, Doctor, in order to capitalize on this, you have to see government policies that promotes an enabling business environment that invites foreign direct investment. When those numbers, our FDI numbers are still pretty low. So you need those dollars coming in to be able to boost activity, to be able to get GDP to be compared to Indonesia is a $1 trillion economy.
Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that?
This is a country that we were outbeat all the Asian tigers. Nigeria was ahead of them in the 60s. When you were talking about Saudi Arabia yesterday and the incentives to bring doctors in, I remember Rufai was saying the British used to come here to come and get information from our teaching hospitals and so on. So if you think Nigeria has to get back to where she was in the 60s. Look at what former Emir of Kano, Sanusi, was saying about per capita GDP being where it was 40 years ago. So we're stalled, right? And so you need policies that are going to promote growth. And because the potential of this economy is, Nigeria, I've said it, Nigeria is a top, if you've got full power, if you've got ease of doing business, if you've got a safe environment, easily a top 10 economy in the world. So the potential is there.
Thank you very much, ROTUS. Good to have you twice this morning.
Yeah.